the government said quite recently that the next CEO would be signing what they say would be a standard employment contract for that level. So one would expect to have very similar terms to CEOs, certainly around the British Isles, and one would expect that there wouldn't be this wiggle room to allow the CEO to effectively negotiate their own terms, which was highlighted and criticised by the Comptroller and Auditor General.
That was Julian Morell, and I'm news editor of Bailiwick Express, Fiona Potney. The government of Jersey is set to welcome its first ever female CEO next year. Belfast City Council head Suzanne Wiley has been chosen as the preferred candidate for the £250,000 a year role in a move the Chief Minister says sends a really strong message that the island's government is serious about diversity. It's a position that will see her lead a diverse workforce of 7,000 employees, ranging from doctors to teachers, waste plant workers, policy advisors and planners, carrying a £420 million wage bill. If that wasn't challenging enough, there's the pandemic fallout, Brexit, a recent report revealing widespread culture issues in the civil service, including bullying and harassment, and a goal of achieving carbon neutrality in Jersey by 2030. But perhaps one of the biggest challenges will be getting the support of our elected representatives. States members have already raised questions about why, yet again, a non-local candidate is taking the top spot and queried whether the appointment process for senior figures is good enough. So concerned was one politician that he launched a bid to delay recruitment until after next June's election, in a move that could have blocked Ms Wiley's ascent into the top role. But that plan came to an abrupt halt this week amid a threat of legal action from the Solicitor General. I spoke to reporter Julian Morell about Ms Wiley, the challenge to her appointment, and what hurdles she might face in future. So who is our new CEO and what do we know about her so far?
Well, her name is Susan Wiley, and she is currently the Chief Executive of Belfast City Council. She's been working for the council for all of her working life, and she became Chief Executive, the city's first female Chief Executive, in 2014. So as I said, she's been there entire life. She's Belfast born and bred. After school, she went to Ulster University and then went into the council working first as an environmental health officer. So that's her background, and she did that for around 15 years. And she's risen up the ranks. Her job previous to becoming the CEO was as Director of Health and Environmental Services. Now she's in charge of about 2,500 people at the City Council. She reports to 60 councillors who represent 8 political parties within the city. And she's generally been well praised for her work. A report in the Belfast Telegraph which revealed this said that she was hardworking, polite, courteous, and achieved what can be a difficult role in Belfast, which is to bring all sides of the community working together with a common purpose. So she does come highly recommended.
So coming over to Jersey then, what challenges might she be stepping into and how might these experiences assist her in that?
Well, in terms of her experience, some of the things she's done in Belfast actually mirror the sort of work going on here actually. So for instance, as City Chief, she has consolidated a number of offices of physical offices of the council and overseen the building of a new central office block for the City Council. So that obviously mirrors what's going on here with the consolidation within the what will be the new Cyril Lamarcon House, if that's what they decide to call it. But she's also developed. She's brought in efficiencies, and that's one thing that will be important in Jersey, particularly as we continue this effort to save £100 million over 4 years, which the government has pledged to do. She certainly is adept at managing diversity in different sides, but she's got a job on her hands because, as we know, following the departure of the last full-time chief executive, there's been reports of low morale, high staff turnover, and a general anxiety within the civil service, caused by change, caused by personality, perhaps. And in some ways, she'll be expected to not only continue the positive work that has been gone on before, perhaps dispense with that which is less positive, and also introduce a sense of common belief, a sense of morale, boosting efforts within the civil service. So she's going to have her work cut out for her, but I'm sure for the £250,000 a year job, which is considerably more than the 142 thereabouts plus pension that she was on, she's stepping up both in terms of pay, she's stepping up in terms of the scale of the organisation. So she will expect to be busy. The good thing is in reviewing some of the interviews she's given in the past in Belfast, she prides herself in being very hard-working and being very diligent. So I'm sure those attributes will put her in good stead.
This week she came very close to potentially not becoming the new CEO. What's happened there?
Yes, that's an interesting question. So the timeline is that she was interviewed in around May for the job. The job itself was advertised in March, and a round of interviews, both a long list and then a short list. And around the end of July, the Jersey Appointments Commission, who oversees this in liaison with the State's Employment Board, which is the official employer of the civil service, they came to the conclusion she was the best candidate who had applied for the job, and so they offered it to her in late July, and the heads of terms, which is a HR speak for a broad agreement, was reached, and the last point between the formal announcement was the signing of the contract. However, before that actually happened, before Miss Wiley put her pen to paper, a proposition was lodged by Deputy Kirsten Morell to delay the recruitment of the next CEO until after next June's election. Now, in terms of the employment process, that put a significant spanner in the works. So what the government decided to do was hold off on the contract signing until this debate happened, and that happened this week.
And what were the reasons for wanting to delay her appointment until elections?
Well, I think we could have a separate pod, and probably lasting a number of hours, on the Charlie Parker years. And one of many observations stroke criticisms was that the process of recruitment and also his departure was indeed controversial, and in fact a lot of people argue was the wrong process. And of course, remember at the very outset, the appointment of Charlie Parker back in 2017 was made by the previous Council of Ministers, where there's a general assumption it was hoped that that Senator Ian Gorst would become the next Chief Minister and work closely with the CEO that he had selected. And of course that didn't come to pass, and there people are saying then perhaps that one of the problems was that you didn't have the right chemistry between the Chief Minister and the Chief Executive, which is obviously important. And so aligning the new Council of Ministers with a new Chief Executive, Deputy Morell argued, was an obvious thing to do without politicising it. It was the best way to getting the right fit.
And were there any concerns about the appointments process itself?
Yes, well, that's the thing as well, because after Mr. Parker he handed in his resignation and left, there was a lot of, first of all, there was a lot of surprise, but then there was a lot of information that came to pass in terms of his contract. There had been a number of what we call side letters signed, which were effectively added perks that weren't part of the articles of his contract. And then also there was the news that came out that he had received a payoff after his departure of £500,000. A lot of people thought this wasn't right. So the government's own watchdog, the Comptroller and Auditor General, she wrote a report into the whole recruitment process of the CEO and has made a number of recommendations. Now, what Deputy Morell's main concern was, or one of those concerns was actually the government haven't implemented the recommendations that the Controller and Auditor General made. Therefore, the recruitment process shouldn't go on until the lessons of the past have been learned and implemented. And it doesn't seem as though, although the government say yes, lessons have been learned, there's no report or there's no mechanism that they've actually produced which formally implements or even comments on the recommendations of that Controller and Auditor General report.
Okay, so on Wednesday this week, Deputy Morell had the chance to present all of those arguments, and there was due to be a vote as to whether or not the CEO recruitment process is delayed until after the elections. But as we know, he decided to withdraw it. Why was that?
Yes, that's right. He withdrew it after a very clear and unambiguous response to a question which he posed to the Solicitor General, who is one of the government's senior and the Assembly's senior legal advisors. And of course, since Deputy Morell lodged his proposition, it became clear that a preferred candidate had been identified. Therefore, a recruitment process had been followed. Now, in an effort to depoliticise the recruitment of the CEO, the government decided to enshrine it in its employment law. So there is an article 26AA within the state's employment law which gives a clear process of how a CEO should be appointed. That is enshrined in law. It's a legal requirement. So what the Solicitor General said was the state's employment board, the state's employer, along with the Jersey Employment Commission, have applied the terms of that law. They've applied the law. Therefore, and making an offer, even though a contract hasn't been signed, making an offer, identifying a candidate, and making an offer to that person is part of that legal process. And as far as he could tell, it had been followed to the letter of the law. Therefore, for an assembly, albeit a democratically elected sovereign power, to judge that employment should not happen because it should be delayed till after the June election would break the law. Therefore, the proposition, even if it was passed by the Assembly, they think that's a good idea, it should be delayed. Of course, the next stage would be the SEB, the Estates Employment Board, implementing that law. So if it chose to adopt the will of the Assembly, the Solicitor General said, actually, you, in my opinion, you would be breaking the law. Therefore, anyone could or the SEB could be exposed to judicial review in the Royal Court. And after that, there could be penalties. And of course, we know that over the last few years, the government have been embroiled in a number of employment disputes within the law, and it can be painful and costly for both sides. So Deputy Morell saw, after hearing that crystal clear advice, thought it best reluctantly to withdraw his proposition. He still took the opportunity to raise concerns about the employment process, about the constitution and relationship of the SEB with the Jersey Employment Commission, with the states. And he said it was another example of the Assembly, the elected members, feeling powerless vis-a-vis the government. So he still managed to get his point across, but the actual delaying mechanism that he proposed failed. Therefore, what's likely, and we haven't heard an announcement yet, but what's likely to happen now is that if she still wants a job, and I'm sure the government hopes she does, Miss Wiley will sign her contract and there'll be some form of formal announcement. If she does accept it, she will start the job in March next year, because the interim CEO, Paul Martin, who was appointed in March, signed a 12-month contract. Therefore, that will finish then. I suspect there will be, before that time, there will be some crossover period for her to shadow the interim. It's probably not ideal. It's someone who's still learning the ropes, teaching someone who's learning the ropes, but that's the way it is. And I'm sure there'll be lots of other civil servants to guide her through the initial early days.
And while we aren't privy to the discussions over her final contract, what salary or perks might we expect? What have we seen in the past?
Well, what we've seen in the past probably won't happen in the future. So we've already talked about the previous full-time CEO, Mr. Parker's contract, which was effectively, there were elements of it that he was able to negotiate himself. For instance, elements said that his performance appraisals can only be carried out by someone which he approved and had worked with in the past. There was also extra holidays, and we also know about the residency, which he never took up, but there was part of the contract which would allow him to take up residency. The government said quite recently that it was quite clear that Ms. Wiley, the next CEO, would be signing what they say would be a standard employment contract, obviously for that level. So one would expect it would to have very similar terms to CEOs certainly around the British Isles, and one would expect that there wouldn't be this wiggle room to allow the CEO to effectively negotiate their own terms, which was highlighted and criticised by the Comptroller and Auditor General.
Julian Morell, thank you very much. Thanks for tuning into this week's Bailiwick podcast. For all the latest updates on this evolving story, please visit bailiwickexpress.com. If you've enjoyed this pod, don't forget to like and share, it all helps. The intro and outro music is I Shift My Weight by Luno. More next week from me, Fiona Potney, and the Bailiwick Express team.